In October of 2007, a family in Wisconsin witnessed something beyond belief in the skies over their backyard. First, the son spotted an enormous winged creature, almost silent as it flew overhead. When the mother came outside, she saw it too, pale and barrel-chested, gliding without flapping its wings. Even the daughter caught a glimpse, and what they saw defied logic and left them stunned. The family was terrified after seeing this. You guys won't want to miss this episode. Let's first go back to 2001, where the story really begins. In March of that year, a group of individuals were called out to investigate something strange near a quarry in Powys, Wales. What they found there would puzzle them for years to come. Now, according to the report as presented by cryptozoologist Karl Schuker, the eyewitnesses were startled when, emerging from the woods near the quarry, they saw something wriggling among the rocks below their feet. As they watched, they soon realized that it wasn't slithering through the quarry, it was somehow moving above ground despite not having any wings. Now, from a distance of around 50 feet, the group watched as what they could only describe as a serpentine dragon made its way above the landscape. It was relatively small, no more than 2.5 feet long, but it so closely resembled one of the mythical creatures that the witnesses were forced to make the comparison. Now, according to their testimony, the creature was green and scaly, its skin shimmering in the sunlight. The tail ended in what were described as a pair of horizontal whale-like flukes, the only appendages that could account for the way it flew about 10 feet off the ground. The other end of its body bore a head that more closely resembled a seahorse's than any other living animal. Now, all the witnesses watched astounded for around 4 minutes until, at last, the dragon soared out of sight, disappearing into one of the many nooks and crannies created by the mining operation. The moment had passed. All they could do was look at each other in silence for a moment or two before launching into a frenzied discussion, comparing their impressions to what they had each seen. Now, what makes this account truly impressive is the pedigree of the observers. According to Karl Schuker, the group who saw this mythological beast, something that we've been told since childhood simply cannot exist, was a collection of British naturalists. In other words, these people who were not only intimately familiar with animals populating the Welsh landscape, but also had every reason to dismiss what they had seen with their very eyes. Yet they're far removed from any fairy tale in the contemporary setting of a modern mining operation in March of 2001. None of them could deny what they had seen: a small dragon levitating above the ground. Now, although they insisted upon keeping their identities a secret, for fear of being ridiculed by fellow scientists, they shared their sighting with the only person they knew who would take their experience seriously: Karl Schuker. Now, closing his retelling of the account, Karl wrote, "The naturalist who led the group had the distinct impression while watching it that this creature was deliberately seeking to keep them at bay, warning them off from approaching further into its territory. It was neither an optical illusion nor a model, but was truly alive, although its appearance was so uncanny that he felt chilled by the encounter. Here be dragons." This phrase, commonly believed to appear on ancient maps, was used to fill in darkened corners of the world, the ones human beings had yet to catalog. Now today, after the entire world has been mapped, we no longer use this phrase. Yet, there are still dragons, those gaps in our knowledge where the supernatural seems to dwell. In this sense, subjects like parapsychology, ufology, and cryptozoology still kind of hold their own dragons. But what if this warning should be taken I don't know, more literally? I mean, did dragons ever truly exist? And if so, what are the odds that they still survive today? If such monsters ever did dwell alongside human beings, it would appear as though they were once more common in the ancient past than in the modern era. Now, when I say ancient, I mean truly ancient. In China, for example, the earliest depiction of a dragon ever discovered was found in 1993 when archaeologists revealed a 10,000-year-old petroglyph of one of the creatures on a cliff in the southwestern region of Shaanxi province. Now, art is one thing, but actual sightings are something else entirely. Yet sightings have continued on and off in more recent years. Now, although 1902 may seem quite long ago to us living in 2024, it is far more recent than 8000 BC when the Shaanxi dragon art was created. It was in this year, around the turn of the century, that a Russian monk by the name of Elder Barsanufius learned that locals in Heilongjiang province knew of a dragon near Muling. Barsanufius was attached to a group of nurses serving in the Russo-Japanese War when the residents approached him with their own stories. Several of them claimed that in the mountains that lay around 40 miles just outside of town, they sometimes saw a winged dragon that would creep out of its hiding place deep within a cave. Now, even still, this early 20th century sighting was secondhand. Now, has anyone stepped forward in the years since to tell their dragon sightings? Now, in addition to the story shared at the beginning of this video, a handful of eyewitnesses have had the bravery to go public and admit the impossible, that they too have seen something with their own eyes that most of the world thinks is simply impossible, unless you play Skyrim. Whether or not you put any stock in their stories is really up to you. In the meantime, it's fun to wonder, what if dragons have some sort of basis in reality, either as physical creatures or as manifestations of the collective unconscious, somehow straddling the line between our shared reality and our individual imaginations? Now, around 2012, a witness with the pseudonym Josh was attending Boy Scout camp at Idaho's Bear Lake. Though only 15 years old at the time, he knows that what he saw was something far out of the ordinary. Josh says that the entire week of scout camp was blessed with sunny, warm weather. Until one day, a dreary canopy of cloud cover settled in, the climate turned foul, and while the day was only interrupted by clouds and a light drizzle, that night, the sky opened up. It was miserable. The last place you want to be in a torrential downpour is shivering in a tent on the shores of a lake. Josh's tent was pitched on the south end of Bear Lake, and sometime that night, he awoke to answer the call of nature. He immediately knew that, whatever had happened, he had a miserable few minutes ahead of him. Now, either way, he was going to end up soaked, either from the rain or from himself, as he felt like his bladder was on the verge of bursting. And to make matters worse, Josh said that the Boy Scouts had a strict buddy rule. If you needed to go anywhere away from the group to do anything, including answer the call of nature, you had to bring someone else along. And that meant enlisting one of his friends and dragging them out into the pouring rain with him. As for why this was the rule, Josh humorously said, "It's not called Bear Lake for nothing." Now, Josh turned to his nearest fellow Boy Scout and shook him awake. With quiet urgency, he told his friend that he needed to go outside and pee really bad. Of course, Josh's friend was understandably upset. "Are you effing serious?" he had asked Josh. But then Josh described what happened next. "When he saw me wriggling like a madman, he got out of his sleeping bag and grabbed his flashlight and jacket. We got our boots on and unzipped the tent. Instantly, we become drenched. We start walking towards the outhouse when about midway there, we hear this loud roar. Thinking it was a bear, we start to panic. We turned around but couldn't see anything with our flashlights. Suddenly, a flash of lightning illuminates the sky, and we see this creature with a massive wingspan, a long neck, and spiked tail. As it flew over us, we could see the silhouette of it, its wings and a downbeat. As it passes, the air from the downbeat literally pushes us into the mud. Terrified, we run back to the tent and hide. Needless to say, I completely forgot about needing to pee until the next morning. My friend and I both saw a very long neck and tail, something that birds do not typically have. In fact, the other scouts later thought it might be the mythical thunderbird that Native Americans of that area speak of in tales, but I'm not totally convinced a bird would look like that thing did. To this day, me and my friends still talk about what we saw, and we both agree that was a dragon. Later on, Josh sketched the silhouette of what he saw that night. When asked to criticize his own drawing, he said that the neck should be a bit longer, and he forgot to add a row of spikes he had also observed along the tail. The wings, though, he said were pretty close to what he saw and re-emphasized their sheer size. There's no way around it, that does look like a dragon. Now, eyewitness sketches are important, especially when the sightings took place before the era of camera phones, or as in Josh's sighting, when the last thing on his mind was taking his phone with him into the pouring rain while he used the bathroom. Another sketch accompanied a sighting from Wisconsin just 5 years earlier, and it seems to show something remarkably similar to what Josh and his friends witnessed in Idaho. The late author and cryptozoologist Linda Godfrey, rest in peace, shared the story of a man whom she called Jim in her 2014 book, American Monsters, A History of Monster Lore, Legends, and Sightings in America. It was October 27th, 2007, and Jim, at the time, was only 16 years old, and he was hanging out with some friends in Oconto Falls in Wisconsin. Now, on the night in question, they were attending a concert at a local arcade. Jim says that the evening was like countless others that he and his friends enjoyed in their teenage years. The top local bands performed, with Jim and his friends joining them on stage now and then, followed by an after party. Of course, being 16, the after party was a relatively tame affair, mostly consisting of them shivering outside the venue, chatting, and sharing their impressions of the show. Now, the group hadn't been gathered for more than a quarter of an hour before they all spotted something strange in the crisp, cold sky. Whatever it was had wings and an enormous body that seemed to be either light tan or white in coloration. Jim later sent an email to Linda Godfrey describing the sighting itself. He wrote this: "We knew it had to be a dragon, because how else would you describe something flying over that was almost silent, larger than a plane, and had a tail, bat-like wings, long neck, and a narrow pointed head, and scales. I remember noticing the scales because they would dimly reflect the streetlights below. We thought we were all seeing things, but 5 minutes later it flew over again, this time in the opposite direction. The 8 people from Green Bay wanted to stay, but they had to leave. They hoped to see more back home." Jim explained that he and his friend, Kay, also called it a night, but they didn't mean that they didn't have plans of their own. They both returned to Jim's house, where they posted up in the backyard in case the creature decided to put in another appearance. After setting up outside on the trampoline at Jim's house, his mother Janet joined them. And to their delight and surprise, the creature appeared once again, if only briefly, above their property, just as Janet was about to turn in for the night. Jim said that his mother said something to the effect of, I'm tired and I'm going to bed. I doubt that it even, holy cow. He was delighted that she could confirm what he and his friends had seen. Linda was able to corroborate Jim's sighting with his mother, Janet, and at the time of the incident, she was around 40 years old. And in fact, Jim's mother even told Linda this. He was describing to me how the light from the city street was reflecting off the creature, and he could see the wings, scales, and bone structure of the wings. Being a doubting Thomas, I thought he was telling a big joke. But I ventured down to pick him up and stuck around as he and a few others were laying around on the grass looking up at the sky. She went on to say how she had first noticed the dragon as a shadow covering the parking lot. Looking above, she saw not a dragon, but what she described as a blue fireball rimmed by yellow and orange. Everyone began joking that the dragons must be engaged in a dogfight, launching their fiery breath at each other. Now, about this time, all of the dogs and geese in the neighborhood began barking and honking, only to have their cries drowned out by another screech that none of them could positively identify. Janet would continue with this. As we were watching the sky coming from the west from the river to over our yard, we saw what appeared to be, and this is the only thing we could think of to describe it as, a dragon. It was making gliding movements up and down, but never flapping its wings. Kind of like how a mermaid is shown when it swims, is how I can best describe the gliding movement of its body. It never flapped its wings at all, and it looked almost cream-colored. The drawing is showing it as we were looking up at the underside. Its stomach reminded me of the underside of a cow, barrel-chested, and from where we were, it looked as large as a cow. I remember the moon was very bright and full that night. I don't know what they were, but I feel privileged and honored to have seen something so unusual you just can't explain. About that time, Jill, Jim's sister and Janet's daughter, arrived on the scene to share in the experience. Jill also confirmed that she saw the same thing as her mother and brother. In fact, Jill claimed to have observed the creature in even greater detail. She would tell Linda Godfrey this. I could see it had pearly, pale scales, and the fireball came from its mouth. After that, I went inside because my heart told me, no, you aren't supposed to be watching this. But they didn't harm us. They were beautiful and flew gracefully. I could see they had 4 legs too. They were tucked up underneath them like when a bird flies. Now, according to Jim, the family sighting was followed by a few other glimpses of smaller specimens that very night. Later, he discovered that another girl at his own school had seen something similar 2 years prior, around the same time of year. Now, with years to reflect on his sighting, Jim speculates that perhaps they were witnessing a migration of some sort. Because of this, he and his family carefully watch the skies above Oconto Falls each and every October. As dramatic as this 2007 sighting is, it pales in comparison to another possible encounter with a dragon-like entity. Although Jill didn't feel threatened by the dragons in Wisconsin, the same cannot be said for an Ohio witness. The woman, named Kayla Laurie, had just moved into an apartment in Massillon. At first, everything seemed normal. Kayla emphasizes this point because she had a number of paranormal experiences all throughout her life, to the extent that she believes that she has the ability to perceive spirits. While Kayla's talent ends at simply feeling their presence, she claims that her husband sees them more often than he feels them. Kayla and her husband did all the things one normally does when moving into someplace new. They unpacked all their belongings, moved all their furniture into their appropriate rooms, and began exploring their new surroundings. One of the things that surprised them was that the apartment all shared an attic, which stretched above each unit to create one shared collective space. The access point was situated in each unit's laundry room. While Kayla simply thought this was an interesting quirk at first, it would soon play a very important role in the experience to follow. Now, slowly, Kayla and her husband got to know their neighbors. The one next door was friendly enough, and they kept each other up to date on what was happening in their own respective lives. One day, Kayla's next-door neighbor received a package in the mail from her older sister who was currently in Japan. Although she never knew what it contained, Kayla would soon come to find it impacting her own life. In fact, Kayla would write this. It started really small. I would just get really tired or feel like I was being watched. I would get scared for no reason, and my husband, who's a very calm guy, would get furious over everything. I started not being able to sleep near the closet in our room, which connected to the bathroom, which was connected to the laundry room, and had to have my back pressed against my husband's, and even then, I could not sleep a lot. Kayla says that these minor annoyances escalated until one night, she experienced a horrific nightmare, or at least what she thought was a nightmare at first, although she is relatively certain that she was not sleeping. She recalls being choked in the middle of the night by some invisible attacker. Through her gasps, she began hurling insults at the unseen force, demeaning it and demanding that it release her. Realizing this wasn't working, she tried to call for help, only to find that she had lost her voice. Now, depending on your interpretation, either Kayla woke up or the attack simply ended. Now, either way, she knew that she and her husband were in danger. Rather than do the usual thing that you see in horror movies, like making excuses, trying to find a way to persevere, Kayla immediately began looking for a new place to live. A month goes by, and they had already picked out a new place and had signed the lease. However, the move coincided with a particularly heavy period for the couple at work, where they were both grinding away at a 60-hour week. This meant that their only opportunity to pack for the move came at the end of the day, well into the night. Now, typically, they weren't able to start the process until around after 9:30. And to make matters worse, they didn't have any money to hire movers, meaning they had to do it all themselves over the course of multiple loads in their small cars. Now, for several nights in a row, they would pack their car, haul over a load to the new residence, repeat this process as often as possible, then return home, eat a quick late dinner, and get ready for work the next day. It was grueling. Evening after evening, they continued this process until finally they had only a few things left in their old apartment. Kayla said that on the night in question, they were ready to complete their third and final trip. She was busying herself around the apartment, collecting things they had left until the last minute and cleaning up so that they could have their security deposit returned in full. To make sure she didn't miss anything, she goes around and she turns on all the lights in the entire unit. Enough lights to make all of our dads scream at us about the electricity bill. Now, while her husband continues packing the car, Kayla would explain the next event that would happen. About 15 minutes in, the lights in the living room started flickering. 5 minutes later, they went out. I figured it was a faulty surge or light, but I refused to go and check because it was in the laundry room, and I stopped going in there before we even started moving. Next was the kitchen lights. These were right next to the laundry room, flickering, then off. I wanted to leave right then. Despite this overwhelming urge to flee, Kayla persevered. Knowing that there was still work to do, she kept busying herself until, at last, her husband began packing their stereo. Eager to seek an excuse to leave, she accepts the speakers as he hands them to her. Then she heads outside. She closes the door behind her, leaving him alone in the apartment, and makes her way to the car. After cramming in the speakers as best she could, she took one last look at the apartment. Part of her wanted to go in and help with the last remaining things. The other part of her was simply too afraid to cross the threshold, even ever so briefly. Instead, she hopped in the passenger seat, buckled her seatbelt, and refused to budge. She stayed there as her husband brought the last remaining bits of stereo outside, then headed back for the final sweep of the apartment. Now, he was only inside for a minute or two at most before he comes racing out the front door, slamming it behind him. As quickly as he could manage, Kayla's husband locked up, raced to the car, leaping into the driver's seat. Now she's staring at him eyes wide as he turned the key in the ignition and peels out of the driveway. Finally, between panic breaths, he tells Kayla exactly what had happened. This next part he told me about, and I believe him. When he went to shut the door, he heard the attic door open and slam shut. He quickly slammed the door closed, but felt something pulling the door open. He saw the face of a woman with the body of a snake, and in his head felt the deepest hatred he has ever felt. Whatever it was wanted him dead. He used the last of his strength to shut the door, turn the lock, slam the screen door, and almost flew into the driver's seat, started the car, and refused to talk to me until we were almost home, which is about 15 miles away. I swear he just ignored the speed limit, which, by the way, he never does. It's why I love being in the car with him, and his face was white as a sheet of printer paper. I never went back to the apartment, and to this day, I suffer from anxiety over what had happened. Kayla later reconstructed what she believed had happened. She realized that all these spiritual attacks she had suffered had begun after her neighbor received the parcel in the mail from Japan. Now, the shared attic, she said, the part of the house where the activity had seemed to originate from, offered free passage to whatever spirit was attached to the contents of her neighbor's package, allowing it to spill over into their own unit. Now, Kayla became convinced that what she and her husband had encountered was a Naga, a member of a mythical race of half-human, half-serpent beings found in Asian cultures. Now, typically, Nagas are actually associated with Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism, and while seen as powerful, are entities that are told to be treated with respect. They rarely exert the negative influence that Kayla and her husband had experienced. What's more, we wouldn't necessarily expect a Naga to hitch a ride to America on a parcel from Japan. Anyway, in light of this, Kayla's husband may not have come face to face with a Naga, but perhaps another creature from Japanese folklore, one of the class of spirits commonly referred to as yokai. Exactly which of these beings came to Ohio is anyone's guess, although a few yokai and related beings fit the bill. It may have been an entity known as the Dragon King, a being historically known for living in Shiga Prefecture's Lake Biwa. Like the malevolent presence that Kayla's husband saw in the laundry room, the Dragon King has the ability to change form, sometimes shape-shifting into a gigantic snake. Now, of course, the Dragon King is thought of as male, and the thing that Kayla's husband saw was a female. But if it's a shapeshifter, I mean, who knows? We rarely see dragons in 2024. Over the years, our culture has decided that, should we see anything out of the ordinary in the sky, we are more likely to be encountering a UFO rather than a gigantic, scaly monster. But the core of the idea remains the same. There are things in the sky that prey upon us. Whenever we search for danger, it's a good idea not only to take a look around you, but above you as well. And because you guys have made it this far into the video, I want you to all comment down below,
Foos Ro Da,
because you're either dragonborn or you're not. Also, don't forget to hit that big ol' red like and subscribe button for more content just like this video. As always, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you all in the very next video.